Good evening. In the High Court in Pietermaritzburg, lawyers representing the National Prosecuting Authority have told 3 judges it was former President Jacob Zuma who's responsible for the delays in his case. They've responded to an application by Zuma and the French arms company Thales for a permanent stay of prosecution. Advocate Wim Trengrove is representing the state in this case. He said today it's important that this case is heard.
There is, in the circumstances, a very high public interest in ensuring that this crime is prosecuted, because not only the usual considerations are at play, vesting a high public interest in the prosecution of all crime, but there is also a significant rule of law consideration in issue, and that is this. Fundamental to the rule of law is the principle that everybody is equal before the law and that everybody is treated equally. And it is very important, therefore, that when a very powerful public official is accused of very serious crime, that he be seen to be treated as everybody else is, and that he does not receive special treatment.
As part of the court action today, you'll see more in just a moment. First, Ayanda Mhlongo, one of the SABC reporters in court in Pietermaritzburg for us today. Ayanda, good evening to you. Just sum up the argument for us. What did the state present? What are they saying in response to the application from former President Zuma?
Very good evening to you, Stephen. Well, the 2 main points that were made by the state today. First, Stephen, was dealing with the matter of political interference, which had been one of the arguments that had been raised by Zuma's defense. And Advocate Trengrove saying there was not a shred of evidence to support the contention that there was political interference in the matter. The other point that he stressed and dealt with quite extensively was with regards to the delays. And as you said in the intro, that the state saying that it was in fact Jacob Zuma who was responsible for the delays. He was saying that been a persistent pattern of litigation, and saying that in fact been about 13 years and 4 months of litigation, and during this time Zuma had lost all the cases, and also adding to that this had also cost the taxpayers to the extent that these cases have cost between 16 to 32 million rand, using the words that this was a luxurious litigation. And just to move on now to Thales and what their submissions were on with regards to Thales. And the main point that he raised with regards to Thales was, remember they made that review application wanting to challenge the initial decision by the NPA to reinstate the charges against the French arms company. And Advocate Trengrove saying that it was in fact Thales that was late to approach the NPA to make their representations. And so there was no expectation from the NPA that they should have given them the opportunity to make a representation. So basically throwing out the submission or the argument that had been made by Thales that they had not been treated fairly and they had not been given an opportunity to make representations to the NPA.
Ayanda, do stay with us. Also today, the advocate for Zuma, Kani, he gave a response. He spoke today in court about the decision of then acting NPA head Advocate Mokotedi Mshe in withdrawing those charges against Zuma.
An organ of state can't argue that please ignore even when we act without integrity, because the decision of Mshe, even if it favors Mr. Zuma in some way, to say Mr. Zuma was the cause of that litigation up until the NAFSA decision simply because he was a party cannot be. I submit that it is, and I know my learned friends know this, it is utterly opportunistic to blame an accused citizen for a decision in which a political party that has become interested in a matter fights with an organ of state. And you say that accused, because he was part of that litigation, is primarily to blame, or if he is not, I think Mr. Trengrove uses the word, they are co-responsible, an organ of state that could have pursued its decision.
Some of the arguments made in court today. Anda Mhlongo still with us. Advocate Sikhakhane seemed to be making an important point there. How did the judges react to that argument?
Stephen, well, certainly that point had people on the edge of their seats, where Advocate Sikhakhane was trying to stress the point and dismiss the submissions made by the state with regards to political meddling. And in fact, those who were following the matter would have known that right at the end, he then made mention that there was a document that they wanted to bring in as a new evidence. But of course, immediately when he spoke of this new evidence, which would support the case that there was political meddling, and mentioning the former Justice Minister, Mr. Penuel Maduna, in that, the state then coming out and immediately objecting to this new evidence, and resulting in the judges then saying that asking for a short break, after which they then came back and asked the two parties to discuss whether or not the state would agree for this letter that Advocate Sikhakhane had wanted to introduce as a new evidence, whether or not it would be allowed, and that today the state and the defense would have to meet over that. And tomorrow morning, when the case resumes, the judges said that if the state rejects this new evidence which wants to be brought in by the Zuma defense, that the Zuma's defense team will then have to make a formal application to have this letter permitted as new evidence in court.
Okay, so more arguments tomorrow. It looks like there's going to be some important details coming through there, around this document and just the way that these arguments will actually end.
Yeah, certainly. I think tomorrow now, Stephen, all eyes are going to be on this new document and whether or not the state will agree to have this new evidence, failing which there'll then be this application that Zuma's defense team will have to file in court, and the decision really on the judges whether that will be heard tomorrow or at a later stage. But of course, we still have the French arms company Thales. They also need to be given the opportunity to reply to the state's submissions, and thereafter it wraps up this hearing. We at this stage don't anticipate a decision. Having spoken to some legal experts, even we're told that the judgment is likely to be reserved in the matter.
Our reporter Anda Mhlongo, thank you very much indeed.